there is just an inherent part of me that's about the beauty of all humans and the gifts of all humans. And I think that that's just who I was. And this career or this tract just helped me land it somewhere.
Welcome to Hey Awesome Girl with Tivi Jones.
Every week, we interview amazing boss babes in tech, medicine, law, entrepreneurship, entertainment, parenting, and more. About their lives, their goals, their why, in order to discover how every day they're working to add more pleasure, ease, and abundance in their orbit. Ooh, hold up. We gotta unpack that. This show is part business advice, part life coaching, part real talk with girlfriends. See how she be coaching me? If you're looking for a show that's real and relatable, but also inspiring at the same time, this is the one for you.
I'm your host, Tivi Jones. I'm founder and CEO of the creative agency Hey Awesome Girl. I'm dog mom to Miss Olivia, the cutest little dog on the planet. And I'm someone who has the same birthday as my maternal grandmother, January 6th. In my business life, I've grown organizations, I've grown audiences, I've managed million-dollar budgets, and I've led large marketing teams generating seven-figure contracts for my clients. On the show, I talk to other boss babes as we try to figure out how to add more pleasure, ease, and abundance into our lives. Today, you'll meet Beth Lakretz, who is the founder and president of Lakretz Creative Services. Beth is a passionate advocate for inclusion and has dedicated her career to inclusive education. After teaching students with mild to severe disabilities in inclusive and self-contained classrooms, she began consulting with schools to support families that wanted their special needs children included in their neighborhood schools. And Lakretz Creative Support Services was born. In this episode, we talk about all things inclusion. It is a very rich and deep episode, and I know you will enjoy it. Hi, Beth. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Tivi. Thanks for having me.
No problem. I know we were chatting a little bit before we started recording, and I do want to come back to some of the things we were just talking about. But before we do that, can you please introduce yourself for folks watching and listening?
Sure. My name is Beth Lakretz, and I live in the suburbs of New York City on Long Island in New York. And what can I tell you about me? I'm a wife and a mom of a 14-year-old amazing daughter. I have been running an educational consulting business. We're going to be celebrating our 30th year in September, which is like the shock of all shocks. If anybody had been told me I'd be doing this for a living, I would have fallen on the floor. I was a teacher, and I never intended to have a business. I never intended to work with grownups. It just sort of happened, which we can get into if you want to.
For sure.
Yep. And so that's my bread and butter. And that's how I met you, through the business group that we've been a part of together. I am passionate about women connecting to their feminine energy and figuring out for themselves what's the balance of feminine and masculine energy. So that's part of my, it's sort of a side thing that I was going to develop, and then the pandemic hit, and we could talk about that too. But yeah. I facilitate a group of women around the moon. We ritual around the full and the new moon every month. So I'm into all that kind of stuff, whatever you want to call it. Some people call it woo. I just call it life. I'm a sort of personal growth and transformation junkie. I love all things that have to do with the ocean. I'm a nature lover, and I am right now in one of my favorite seasons of the year, which is award show season.
Yeah.
I am completely obsessed.
You to say that.
I know! I'm completely obsessed with award shows, so I have to watch every film and see every performance. And so it's one of my, one of the things you were talking about is pleasure, and that is definitely one of my pleasures. I love great film, theater, music, and so I love to immerse myself in award show season as part of it. It's like everybody who knows me knows if like there's an award show on, if you're watching, you could text me and we could talk about like who's winning. But other than that,
don't call me.
Do not interrupt.
Right. First of all, so I had to mute myself because I'm trying to take notes. I'm like, Beth is giving me so much already.
You have to tell me to slow down if I talk too fast. In one of my kindergarten classrooms that I taught many years ago, we goal set. Every single kid in the class and every single adult in the class set a goal for themselves. And mine was to talk more slowly. And I didn't really 100% achieve it. And so, by any means. So feel free to slow me down at any time.
No, it wasn't you. It was just that there was a bunch of on my desk that was blocking the keyboard. So yeah, I wasn't prepared. So a few things that I was able to write down. 30 years in business. Wow. Amazing. Feminine, masculine energy. Love it. I'm from the South, the Bible Belt, so I do call it woo-woo just because of how I grew up. But I'm definitely 100% this point in my life here for the woo. Want to dig into that. And then award show season as part of your pleasure, ease, abundance practice. Amazing. Let's start with the business. Because you said something like, if you'd asked me when I started my career if I'd be doing this. So how did you come to your creative support services businesses?
Well, I was a teacher. So, I mean, I really want to go all the way back.
Yeah,
when I was 13 years old, I read a book called Sunrise, which was a true story about a dad wrote about learning to communicate and be present with his son who had been diagnosed with autism. And I read this book, and I don't know why, but it just completely captivated me. And they happened to live near where I lived. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go work with them. And so by the time I did, contacted them, they had moved and they opened an institute in the Berkshire Mountains in Massachusetts, I believe. But it really captivated me and had me learning about autism. And I just was fascinated by it. And at that moment, I decided I was going to be a social worker and I was going to work with kids with autism. I was all of 13 years old. So fast forward, I went to social work school and loved it. And it really made me a lot of who I am today in terms of looking at the whole of a human and the whole of a community. Right. I think in our culture, we've become so specialized. If you think about medicine, like, the cardiologist doesn't know what the pulmonologist is, so this was like a very holistic approach and I loved it. But what I learned in social work is that I was probably going to work more with the systems and the parents than the kids. So I had my first leap moment of my life, my junior year of college, which I had been telling everybody that I knew, my parents, my family, everybody, that I was going to be a social worker. And now I'm in my junior year of college. I don't want to be a social worker. And it was a big deal for me because I had been so entrenched as this is who I am and this is what I'm going to be. That identity. And I'm a big believer in the woo, Tivi. So I was talking to a professor of mine and he said, I have a friend, professor, who teaches at Syracuse University, which was about a little over an hour from where I was at Cornell. And he has a program, a master's degree in special education around teaching kids with autism. I can introduce you to him. So, again, for me, I always look at the threads of life and how a thread leads you to whomever or wherever. So I followed the thread and I met the man and I went to Syracuse University and got my master's degree in special education. And what was very unique about that program is that kids, even labeled with the most significant disabilities, were educated in general education classrooms with kids without disabilities. Wow. So I wasn't at an autistic school or a severely disabled school or all those other places. I was in this integrated school that had kids labeled gifted, kids labeled with severe and profound disabilities, and everybody in between. And so inclusion was my thing, and it totally matched the social work thing about looking at the whole and the all. And it was the most remarkable place. And I learned basically almost everything that I know in that environment. And my family kind of needed me to come home at that time after a couple of years in Syracuse. And so I moved back here. And at that time, nobody was including anybody here on Long Island. So people thought I had 25 heads. Now people think I have like 10, but then it was like 25, right. People, and so I taught one place for a year and I was a special education self-contained teacher, which was nothing I ever wanted to do or really know how to do.
Right.
In all respect to people who do that, you know,
Right.
it's a whole skill set that I didn't have. But I did find a teacher who was willing to integrate her typical class with my class, and we had a blast. But the administration wasn't really all that supportive of it, so I left. I kind of got recruited to teach at a place that was trying to integrate, actually it was a preschool program, kids without disabilities and kids with autism. And I went out there and I taught for a couple of years, and I just wasn't thrilled. And so I thought I would spend a year doing a little bit of consulting.
What particularly was not thrilling about it?
Politics, let's just say that.
Okay.
You know, politics within the system. And then I think the other thing for me is that at that time in my life, well, still, but even more then, because now I know how to rest and take care of myself. Like, I literally lived that job 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There wasn't a parent who couldn't call me on the weekend. There wasn't like, I was like, and I got exhausted. I got totally exhausted. And so I decided to take a break, consult for a year, and look for a school that was in alignment with my values. And that turned into this. It just was clearly my path because I had to do next to nothing to get this business going. Again, I wasn't even planning to get this business going. I thought basically I wanted to continue to live in my little apartment. I didn't want to have to move back in with my parents or get a roommate or anything like that. I just wanted to be able to sustain myself until I found a job that felt like it was in alignment with my values, because places were not in alignment with my values, which are about inclusion, about looking at each human being as gifted. Yeah. About looking at a community as a place that only when we focus on the giftedness of every single member are we all at our best, that we're at a loss if we exclude or, so I wasn't finding any place that was in that mindset.
Hearing you talk about your journey is just making me think about like how I grew up. So I grew up in Eastern North Carolina. I was included in the gifted classes, but it very much was a segmented and segregated class or classes. You had the different levels. And I think a lot about, actually, I think about this experience all the time. I was in Target one day. I feel like a lot of my stories start with, I was in Target.
Absolutely, why not?
But I was in Target one day, and there was a mom in there with her son, and I was shopping, and her son was expressing himself and upset about some things, and she was, trying to get him to come along, and I just kind of, gave her a little nod and a smile as we're walking through the same aisle. And there was a gentleman on the aisle as well. And when the mom and the child walked past, to me, I've seen autism show up in a lot of different ways in my life. My younger brother, we suspected he had Asperger's. And so because I had experience not that much in my educational life as a student, but just friends, ecosystem, etc. So the mom passes by, she goes to the next aisle, and the guy kind of looks at me and makes a comment about her controlling her kid, like basically saying like she needed to control her kid. And I'm getting upset now. And I remember it was one of those situations where it kind of felt like he was going to try to hit on me and using that as an opening. And I just like looked at him and I was like, I'm pretty sure that she has a special needs child, and like leave them alone, basically. Like they're not he is not bothering me. I'm shopping, she's shopping. Like they should be able to go out into Target and have their own life experiences. But I realized too that proximity matters. And this gentleman, bless his heart, as we say in the South, probably wasn't in proximity with a lot of students who express themselves in that way. And so he doesn't know what that looks like. He doesn't know how to be compassionate in some ways, or how to just let people live their lives and mind his own damn business in other ways. But it just makes me think how our educational system does us a disservice, because I mean, you and I, we've talked about race and inclusion and all of that in some of the programs that we've been in together. Proximity matters in all of the ways.
Exactly. And I have to say, Tivi, as you know, again, I don't know, maybe we're making baby steps with race, or infinitesimal, you know, I don't even know what to say, but at least it's on the table.
Right.
People with disabilities are still sanctioned, that people believe that they're better off elsewhere. They're better off with other people with disabilities. It's still a very sanctioned.
And it's only because we're uncomfortable. It's because we're not willing to like check ourselves and be compassionate and be kind. Like, who cares if you're uncomfortable?
Exactly. And people believe in the education world, and not all people, I'm not making a blanket statement, but there is definitely a belief in most people. Again, I've been working with people for 30 years, adults, you know, teachers, administrators, that there is something magic and special about segregated special education classrooms that can't be provided in a general education classroom. And that, you know, something miraculous is going to happen over here. But what our data shows is that the long-term results of segregated special education is not very positive. It's not employment. It's not higher education. It's not all those things that we strive for in education. And yet we still hold this belief system that, you know, putting a bunch of adults in a day hab program is better for them. You know, people do it out of the goodness of their heart. It's not mean. It's not, there is, you know, to me, one of the things I talk about all the time is that inclusion never has anything to do with the people that are being included or excluded. It's only about the people who are in power around them. And so, you know, just for an example, I could support a school district and they could start to include more and more kids who have a wider range of issues.
Right.
And we could be having a lot of success in each kid reaching their own potential. You know, we're not trying to make kids who are not academically gifted all of a sudden academically gifted like you are. We're trying to help and each person to reach where they want to reach next, their next place. Having tons of success. If that person who was in charge and hired us to take the district in that direction leaves, and a different person comes in with a different philosophy, all of that gets dismantled.
Wow.
So who gets to be included has nothing to do with the person. I could take the same child and put them in a classroom with a couple of teachers who are like, because this happens for us all the time, myself and my team. Bring it on. We don't know what to do. Help us. We're excited. Okay, great. She learned to do that? Awesome. Great. Really, really excited. And then they go to the next class, the next year, and the teachers are, this kid doesn't belong in my classroom. This kid is much better served, you know, if we sent them over there. And so it's the same exact kid. But it has to do with the people who are around them, which I think is similar for all of these ways that we other people.
Yes. And I mean, and also like thinking about the long-term ramifications on our ecosystem and mental health on. So one thing that comes to mind for me, there's a local group here in Durham, North Carolina, where I live, called Reality Ministries. And I started, I volunteered with them at one point. I've donated to them for a couple of years now. Are you familiar with them?
No, what do they do? Tell me more.
So I
love the name of it. So I'm like, ooh, what is that?
they're basically, their premise is they work to provide community and friendship for adults with special needs. And when I first learned about them, it was revolutionary for me, because I hadn't thought about the ways in which the ease with which I have developed friendships in my life, and how that is truly a privilege, and that there are certain groups, people who don't have that same ease. So when we think about, like you're saying, the othering in schools where they segregate different populations, think about once they graduate from high school, you know, where are their friend groups? Where's their community? Who do they fellowship with? And so Reality Ministries, they it was easier before the pandemic, but they would host like these cafes where we would get together, and some of the people in their program would like prepare meals from these like custom recipes, and they would tell us about the recipes, and we would sit with them and have conversations and talk about things that they like. And they'd also do concerts. But having students in a class in middle school or high school or elementary school, it's not just that one thing, right? It compounds throughout their life, and it really affects our community and our ecosystem. And we're blind to these things. Totally. I was blind to it until I was introduced to it. So this is one of the reasons why I was so excited to have you on the show to talk about your work. Yeah. Because I think a lot of people need to know about it.
Well, and it's interesting because there's so many layers, many layers as there is to anything that we do. But in this particular instance, so I don't think I even described what we do. We provide professional development for school districts. That's what we do. So we help school districts. We work deeply with administrators on creating a mission and vision about inclusion. And we work with them on implementation, and we teach teachers how to work together to include kids. So, there's a lot of pieces and parts of it, but that's sort of the overview. And, you'll have a lot of parents in a community saying, I don't want my kids in a class with those kids. There is so much misinformation and so much pressure on teachers and kids now to deal with all the standardized tests that we are now required that everybody has to pass and take. We've lost our individualized looking at kids, the pressure to take tests, pass tests. I mean, here in New York, some teacher evaluations, although it's calmed down right now, but teacher evaluations are connected to how well they do on tests, standardized tests. Wow. And so, you have a kid who's not going to do well on that standardized test who wants them in their classroom when they might, so there's the community part, there's the parent part, there's the lack of knowledge on teachers' part of how to actually do this. How do we have a child who functions 3 years before grade level in this 6th grade classroom? How do we do it? What's the technology? And so there's the philosophical barriers. Yeah. That people just don't believe it's the right thing. And again, that doesn't make them bad people. It's just people don't believe it's the right thing. But, again, people with disabilities, have not historically been a group with a lot of power in our culture. Yeah. And so there are certainly groups of disabled people who want to be segregated, who want to be, so there's so many pieces and parts of this. Yeah. And for me, I want to honor that. And I want to create a community in which you're talking about the ecosystem where everybody is valued and everybody understands each other so that we can live, grow, work, play, have pleasure, grow together. Yeah. Even if we're not together, but that it's not, I'm in Target and I see this, autistic kid having a meltdown and I'm going to go hit on some woman by saying, yeah, that woman needs to control her kid. But that's only going to come through some level of proximity, education, and community. Right. So that's my bias.
Well, I'm not going to say it's a good bias to have, but I think it's a good bias to have.
In our world, and you're in my perspective, in the way we think about the world, but not everybody does. And that's okay. We need to make a space for that too. And yes, I have to say, for me, this time period of, 2020 on, I was so hopeful that the pandemic and George Floyd and all of the things that have occurred were going to help us heal our polarity. And what has seemed to have happened is it has exploded our polarity. And maybe that's why, in order to heal it, it needs to be out as deep and big as it is. It needs to all be unearthed and uncovered before we can move, maybe. Yeah. But it's...
It actually makes me think about, so you mentioned like the divine feminine, divine masculine, full moon energy. So as you were talking, I love the moon, first of all. Like, the name Luna is on my short list for children's names. Like, I've always been obsessed with the moon. But whenever there's a full moon, like I get this like frantic energy. Like
Mm-hmm.
it just like
Yep.
everything feels so overwhelming. Like I can't take it, I can't take it, I can't take it. And then all of a sudden there's this like the bubble bursts. And
Yep.
then like things kind of fall into place. And so maybe that's where we are, like as a collective. Like we gotta
Totally.
expand, be frantic, go crazy, let humans human in all the ways, and then maybe it'll burst and things will start falling into place.
I hope
Maybe.
so.
I don't know. We'll see.
I hope so. We'll be watching, that's
right,
for sure.
Right. We'll definitely be watching. Talk to me about how your experience in education and inclusion influence like how you parent, how you teach your daughter, family members, etc.
That's a great question.
If you don't mind sharing.
No, not at all. I mean, I think in general, in terms of me, I think that this is who I always was. Like, how does a 13-year-old become passionate about autism? You know, like, how does that even happen? So I feel like, you know, I was the kids who were struggling the most could come to talk. You know, so I think that there is just an inherent part of me that's about the beauty of all humans and the gifts of all humans. And I think that that's just who I was. And this career or this tract just helped me land it somewhere. You know, maybe it could have landed somewhere else, but it landed, you know, in this arena. Yeah. And so I think for me, I have always wanted to be in communities of diversity of some kind. And there are ways that I've been really great at that and ways that I've sucked at it, you know, to be honest. But it's something I'm always thinking about, looking for, etc. And I married a man of a similar ilk, you know. And so, you know, he didn't know a lot about disability. He knew a little bit, but, you know, so it's just sort of like a foundational part of me and my family. Yeah. My daughter is not white. And so we live in a very diverse community, and are raising her in a community in which she is not the only or the other. Also, and I have learned a tremendous amount of what it is to be a white mama parenting a non-white girl. And so I think my inclusion perspective that I've carried all these years carries to her. Yeah. And of course, you know, then there's sort of the education piece of it, which I know too much as a mom. It's great, but I know too much because, you know, like in any moment I could call a teacher and say, hey, you're missing A, B, C, D, E, and I have to really watch myself. Yeah. And it's like part of me wishes I didn't know so much. It would just be easier to parent around school if I didn't know so much.
Do you mean because you want to be more involved, but you pull yourself back for your daughter's benefit, or what's?
Well, I don't, you know, if it's something that she really needs, I'm in there advocating. There's like, I could give you a list of a million, you know what I mean? There's no way. But like, how do I explain this? Like, there are things that I know about instruction. Like, I can't at a teacher meeting tell them how to teach. I can say my daughter's I have this concern about this or that, and we'd like to know how to support her at home and all that stuff. But I can't look at what they're doing and go, oh, no.
Grab your red pen and like,
right. Right. So that's what I mean. Like, I know so much about how, you know, she's been in classes that are similar to what I teach people how to do. And when she comes home and tells me how they're doing it, and I'm like, oh, but I'm not a consultant to them. I'm a mom.
Right. Yeah.
So I can advocate for what she needs every minute of the day or any minute of the day. And I do, but I can't get involved in things that I train other people in with her teachers.
Okay. That's fair.
You know, you can't be their professional developer when you're a mom in the classroom, unless the district hired me to do that. But like, you can't, you know, step into that role unannounced and uninvited.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and it's such a hard, like, equity work is hard. That's, you know, what we do at Hey Awesome Girl. And I did some of this work before we were the company that we are now. I was talking to someone else on the podcast about it too. Like, you can't just go into someone else's community and be like, you're doing this thing wrong, and here's why.
Yeah.
Let me tell you.
Exactly.
Because people won't receive it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, this work is tough. Very, very, as you know, like you've been doing this work before it was of the past 2 years, it's been like trendy. But you've been doing this work for 30 years.
Well, and it's interesting, and I'm going to just be, because we're just honest women, you and me.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like I get slammed sometimes when I say that I do inclusion, because my work is not DEI. It's not about race in of itself. I don't feel qualified. I don't feel qualified in any way to address those issues completely. It's not my background. It's not my training. Has it been infused somewhat in the work that we've done always? Of course, because the overrepresentation of kids of color in special ed is very well documented. And,
wow.
I've certainly, just out of my own being, talked to teachers about, but I'm not trained to do a DEI training, but the inclusion word now is about race. And almost like I've talked to some DEI, brilliant, amazing people to say, can you include disability in there? Because it's almost like the DEI world in some instances, not in all instances, has left disability in the on the side again.
Yes.
And so, but when I say I'm an inclusion, my business is about inclusion. People right now in 2022 assume that's DEI. Yeah. And so navigating this time and not being offensive and not stepping on very, very, very important concepts that are happening in our world right now, is really important to me. And how do we also continue to provide space for people with disabilities to be in the positions that they would like to be in? And for kids to be in positions where they graduate from high school with friends and options and get invited to birthday parties and aren't made fun of when they drop their tray in the cafeteria, like whatever those things are.
Yeah, thank you for that distinction. I think it's easy for me. I'm a cis presenting, like, able body, or I don't know the correct wording, so I apologize if I'm not naming it correctly.
That's all good.
I'm an ally in a lot of ways for all the different communities, and I have to check my privilege and have to check like how I show up in this space
every day.
It's easy to forget, like, I exist as this person, but not everybody has the same experience as me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I check myself every day. And again, on some level, when you were saying, I apologize if I'm not using the right words, I feel like all of our concern about using the right words, the right pronouns, the right titles, the right descriptors is like almost getting in of our way of being real and raw and screwing up.
Because that's how we learn. Like, we learn by screwing up.
Exactly.
I mean, not too badly, but
right. No, but I'm sure that I make microaggressions at times because I'm ignorant about a certain thing. I mean, we had an experience not that long ago. Was it last spring? We teach this grouping strategy that's really, really fun to teachers, and we showed an example. The teachers called it the picnic, and we show pictures of it and all that jazz. I had no idea, and we've been presenting this for 5 years. And a person, we were doing it on Zoom, wrote to me in the Zoom and said, do you know, if you knew the history of that word picnic, you would never use it. And I was so upset because honestly, in my white, cis, whatever the heck you want to call me, privileged place, I did not know that word was a trigger. I had no idea. Now I know. We don't use it anymore. But there are so many things that people don't know about people with disabilities. As a matter of fact, there are many groups of people now who want to be called disabled people. We worked for so many years on person first language, and now that's flipping. But who wants it flipped? Who doesn't want it flipped? We're going to screw up in our languaging. We are going to, because there's so much emphasis right now on languaging that on some level I feel like at times it gets in our way.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. And I also think that I was thinking about this morning. I was listening to a podcast about white allyship. With Mo Carrick, I think is her name. She was referred to me by Susan Hyatt. And they were talking about their journey as it was Mo Carrick and someone else, another white woman, who was talking about being a white ally, white female ally, and their journey of allyship and feminism, and how feminism really does a disservice if it's not intersectional, and just all of those things. And it just made me think that in our society nowadays, we really have to give people grace and space to grow, and not like hear people make one mistake out of ignorance and like hold them to that mistake for the rest of their lives. I think that there are, as I like to say, there are fouls and there are flagrant fouls. I think some behaviors are super duper problematic and intentional and explicit. And I think some things are just mistakes out of ignorance. And I think sometimes I actually have a practice when I don't know something. I have a practice of saying I'm ignorant about this thing, because I want to take the stigma away of that with that word, because it just means you don't know, like you're not exposed to it. Like it's not saying you're dumb. It's just saying you're not aware. And if you're a human doing life on Earth, like you're not gonna know everything. Exactly. You're gonna be ignorant about some things.
Totally.
But you can learn about it.
You can learn about it, and if you do learn about it, that's all you can do. Like that's the whole thing. Like I think about all the time, and I talk with my daughter about this a lot. And anybody that I know, honestly, is the word retard. People throw that word around all the time. Yeah. You're a retard. Oh, I'm retarded if they made a mistake. And that word is so loaded and so derogatory. Yeah. And people don't realize, I know some very kind, loving, lovely people who toss that word around all the time. Yeah. And I have to say to them, do you know what that word connotates? Do you know the connotation of that word? Do you know where that word originated? Like, and so it's like, to me, that's often ignorance. It's not meanness necessarily. It's just like, that's the word that people say. Yeah. And that's okay if you can correct yourself. But, and again, not to get caught up on languaging, but the way people toss that word around has so much to say about people with cognitive differences. Yeah. People who don't function exactly the same way as them.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I thought we stopped using that word like 10 years ago. I didn't.
People still toss it around all the time. The kids toss it around. Yeah. I mean, my daughter's 14. The kids say it.
Yeah, I have heard some younger folks use that.
Yep. And I've heard adults use it last year.
Oof. Yikes.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, let's talk about, I really want to go back to what you were saying about maybe I heard it this way, the over-indexing of children of color in special needs classes. Talk to me about some of that data and what you think that's based on.
So I have to be perfectly honest, I don't have the current data in my head to say. But many school districts, many states have been, what's the word I'm looking for? Targeted, have been identified as, their people with disabilities take up about approximately, not take up, that's terrible. They're about 10% of the population are people labeled with disabilities. Okay. Wow. So we have places that have kids that have way more than 10% in their school system. So that's just a red flag already. Like, why are all of these kids getting labeled and identified? Yeah. And then out of that 10%, often the percentage of kids of color are over the percentage of kids of color in that neighborhood. Wow. Okay. Did that come out in English?
Yep. I got it.
Did that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So we see, Black boys who can't sit still. Are kids who might end up, and then cultural things. I'll never, ever, ever forget this. This is just an example from many years ago. When I was at Cornell University, I took a course on race from this amazing man. And we read this amazing book, and it totally changed my life, really. Because where I grew up, there were no Black people. When I grew up. I'm considerably older than you. I'm about to be 58 next month. And so in my little suburban town, there were no people of color. We had a couple of people who were from Asian backgrounds, and that was it. But yet my parents were sort of very liberal Democrat people. Like, we didn't have a lot of prejudice in our house. So I just didn't have any proximity. So anyway, I took this class and it was amazing. And one of the things he told us was about the inherent bias in IQ testing. An example that he gave from back then, again, so we're talking 30 something years ago. On one of the tests, one of the questions was, take these 4 letters, unscramble them into a word that will give you a sport. And the letters are 2 O's, a P, and an L.
Okay.
The right answer is polo. For the kids who wrote pool, it's the wrong answer.
Wow.
So there's classism, there's racism, there's privilege. Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff built into the system. Yeah. Now I'm sure that question doesn't exist anymore, but that's just an example that I learned back in 1980, whatever, 3, 4, whenever I took that class, of how the system, the education system is set up as a white privileged system.
Yeah.
And we haven't made a lot of accommodations. And so it's very easy for kids of color to end up being labeled at a higher rate. Because the system is inherently privilege focused.
Yeah. Wow. I'm still stuck on that question. It illustrates your point very, very well. Have IQ tests changed much since then? How do schools nowadays determine if someone is special needs or needs extra support or...
Yeah, to qualify for special education. And again, it's different state by state, so it's not like there's one measure that is used across the country. But there are a series of handicapping conditions, they're called, that you have to fit into in order to receive special education services.
Okay.
And that can be determined, some by a combination of achievement and IQ testing. That's done. So if a child is referred for special education, they are going to receive a battery of tests. And some of those are about achievement and some of them are about IQ. And so each handicapping condition has different qualifications that are needed in order to be labeled as a person with a learning disability or with an intellectual disability or with autism. Like, each of them have different qualifiers. Some of them are medical. Some of them you need a diagnosis for. And some of them is strictly based on that testing. But any child with that ends up being labeled with an educational disability will have gone through some sort of testing. And I'm sure, again, I'm not an expert on standardized testing, on IQ testing by any means, but yes, I'm sure that they have changed and there are more of them than there used to be. And but I can't imagine that they're 100% bias free yet.
Right.
I'm sure they've improved tremendously, but I cannot imagine that.
And so when who initiates that process of those tests? Is that something that a parent has to initiate, or a teacher, or is it both, one or the other?
So anybody can initiate it. The parents can initiate it. The school can initiate it. The teacher can initiate it. In order to go ahead with the process, the parents have to agree to it.
I see. Okay.
So like a school can't evaluate a kid. I mean, they have the evaluations that they do for all kids. And they bring those to the table and they say, you know, Beth is in my class and she's reading so significantly differently than everybody else. And she's really struggling with this. And I think we need to do something about it. So then there's a level of service that doesn't require special ed. That's general education. That's required. It's called RTI, response to intervention. And that's a series of 3 tiers of strategies that are applied in the classroom, outside of the classroom, to support that child. And if those strategies aren't successful, then they can refer to special education. So if a teacher refers a child to special education, the parents have to agree to the evaluation and the process.
Okay. So these other strategies, because we work in health equity work, and a lot of our work right now is around COVID mitigation. We're working on a couple of other potential projects around sexual health and maternal and infant health and equity. And I'm wondering about how all of the other dynamics that children experience impact like how their results on these tests, like how they show up in classrooms, like if they're not getting adequate sleep or food, or if their nervous systems are in high alert. Like is that some of the work and thinking that you all do as well, like thinking about the whole, like the totality of the child's experience and how that helps them show up in school?
Sure. And again, I just want to be clear that I'm not in any way involved in the evaluation or labeling process of kids. That's not what I do. But we certainly, when a team that we're working with presents a child to us that they need support around, we certainly go, all right, what's happening in this human's life? Who are they? What's happening? Et cetera, et cetera. And definitely, if you have a good school and a good team, they're going to be looking at all of those things. It doesn't mean that they'll necessarily not go down the road of labeling them. Okay. And sometimes labeling them is a great thing because it gets them additional supports that they might need. But it also, like for right now, just what's happening, at least around in my neck of the woods, is the number of kids being referred for special education in the pandemic is off the charts because they fell behind. It's like, it's a pandemic. Everybody fell behind. Can we let go of where we're all supposed to be,
right,
and be where we are, and move to the next place? So all of the mental health, food scarcity, like all the issues that families are dealing with right now, illness, death, food issues, job issues, just the pandemic in and of itself, having to be in our house. Like, how can that not be impacting kids in all ways as learners, as humans? But the increase in referral is off the charts. So yes, people look at that, and yes, people don't look at that.
I can talk about this all. I don't even have kids, but I've always been the type that's like, how can I be like, how can I prepare? Also have a lot of compassion.
You can't prepare. I have to just say to you, I thought I was really prepared to be a mom. I've been in the field forever, and people can tell you what it is, and until you do it, it's a thing unto itself.
I mean, I think at this point, that's kind of how it is. It's it's because I've been trying for 10 years now, 20 years, not 20 years, 10, 15 years. How can folks be better allies for folks with disabilities?
Well, I think meet some. Put yourself in situations in which your kids interact with other kids with disabilities. Be open to the possibility of your child being friends with a kid with a disability. When you see the mom in Target or the mom on the playground, smile and ask, you okay? Make space in your heart, in your being, for that there are people who function in the world really differently. And that's okay. The whole notion of neurodiversity, instead of talking about like, oh, this is bad, or that person should control their kid, to be open to, well, this person functions, their brain functions in a really different way than mine. And that's just part of the human dynamic. That's part of humanity. It always has been. So can you learn a little bit? Can you put yourself in positions where you might interact with people with disabilities and read, listen to a podcast, read somebody's Facebook page, go out on a Facebook page, just open your horizon. And again, and I may be totally misspeaking, and please call me out, Tivi, if this is completely white privilege obnoxiousness. But like, to me, it's the same thing as people who have no experience with people who are not the same skin color as them.
Proximity matters.
How can you be an ally? How can you be an ally? Get involved. Meet, get to know, listen. Put yourself in situations where you're the only for a change.
Yeah, and also work to do some of that learning yourself. Don't
exactly.
As a Black woman, I'm tired of people coming to me asking me about race. Google it. There are plenty of great books out there. So yes,
absolutely.
Like you're saying, proximity matters, but also you can pick up a book, you can take a master class.
Well, and I have to say, Tivi, you and I would pick up a book. Not everybody wants to pick up a book, but you can join a Facebook page.
True. Yes.
You can join a Facebook page where moms of kids with disabilities are talking about their experience. And you can, I'm on some Facebook pages of people who are talking about race issues, and I just am quiet. And listen and read and learn. It's not my place. to say. It's my place to listen. And it's the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like if you join any of the neurodiversity groups or the autistic groups right now who are really advocating for the acceptance of neurodiversity as opposed to trying to make autistic people different than they are. You know, if you watch TV show, there's a bunch of TV shows on now that are with autistic actors playing autistic people. Watch. You know?
Yeah.
So there are ways that you can be an ally that are very similar to other ways that we're asking for allyship in this world.
Yeah, for sure.
To me. Now, again, if that feels really off to you, please just call me out. I'm happy to be called out.
I mean, I think these are first steps, right? Like,
right.
To me and how I like to operate, I got into the work that I do because I knew that representation mattered. And a lot of times in our individual world, representation comes from proximity. Like, we have to see people, we have to experience people. And so I think that's a very solid first step. It can't be the only step. Like, there have to be like active actions that we do.
Yes, of course.
But starting with listening and starting with proximity, I think is a great first step, Beth.
Yeah, I think because for me, I think a lot of people take action, but it's not grounded in anything. So then it's not effective or helpful because it's not grounded in what you need to know or what you need to have observed to take that action. So sometimes action for action's sake ends up not being helpful, even though it's intended to be. So
that's true. Where can folks find you online to learn more about you and your work?
Well, my website is www.lakretz.com, and my last name is spelled Lakretz. And we have a Facebook page, and I think we just opened up an Instagram and a TikTok, but my team is taking care of that. I am not tech involved much. So those are coming soon to a screen near you.
Awesome. Well, I can talk about this all day.
I'm just bummed we never talked about the feminine and masculine energy stuff, but this was amazing.
We gotta have a part 2 just to talk about that.
Okay. I would love that. I would love that.
I would love that too. Thank you so much for joining me today, Beth. And I will add all your information into the description box, and I will see you next time.
Thank you. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you so much for watching this episode. I hope you found some nuggets of wisdom in it from Beth or myself. I know I did, and Miss Olivia's coming in here to join me as we wrap this up. A couple of things that stood out to me in this episode. One, Beth mentioning how she started a new path for herself in college and got out of that old identity in order to get on her correct path. We talked about true inclusion in schools. We talked about the ecosystem impact of exclusion and the modern day segregation of folks with disabilities. And I think what's most important is we talked about how to be an ally and where to start if you're interested in becoming an ally. Once again, I'm Tivi Jones, founder and CEO of Hey Awesome Girl, recording from my home office with Olivia sitting under my chair now. As a reminder, Hey Awesome Girl's social mission is to celebrate and empower women, especially women of color. We believe digital entrepreneurship is a resource to increase confidence, to close racial gender wealth gaps, and provide a means of freedom for women all over the world. Because as we like to say, empowered women empower women. And that is exactly what we're trying to do with this show. Stay tuned for our next episode. I can't share who it's going to be, but please follow us, like and subscribe on all the channels so you can get notified when our next episode comes out. You can also visit our website, heyawesomeGirl.com/show. Join our email list, get some extra goodies from us, and you can also check out our Hag Swag shop. Until next time, don't forget to stay awesome. So it's me again, just jumping back on to share a special resource with you. So I know I talk a lot about our pleasure, ease, and abundance framework that we use at Hey Awesome Girl, but maybe you aren't quite sure what that means and how you can incorporate that into your life. Well, we have a free resource for you that can help with that. It's our Pleasure, Ease, and Abundance playbook. In this playbook, I outline the 9 elements of pleasure, ease, and abundance you need to consider to help you create a life that is fun, fabulous, and free. I walk you through journal prompts, I share resources, and give you some actionable steps you can take to get you further away from stress, exhaustion, and being broke. To download this free playbook, go to heyawesomeGirl.com/framework, enter your email address, and we'll send it right over to you. That's heyawesomeGirl.com/framework to download your free playbook today. Olivia, the nerve of you to come in here and pass gas. Rude. Jeez.